My grandfather built 3 patents from 40 years of calloused hands. My uncle scheduled a meeting to take all 3, 9 days after the funeral. When I walked in, the documents were already spread across the table. 3 folders. Color-coded. Tabbed. A pen placed beside my signature line at the exact angle you set a fork when you want dinner to feel inevitable. Craig Hargrove had never once touched a piece of wood in his life. He stood up, smoothed his suit, and said, "This is a straightforward estate consolidation, Eleanor. Your grandfather would have wanted the family to move forward. He didn't say hello. He didn't say he was sorry for my loss. He said straightforward, and he said it using the name of a man 9 days dead. I have been a woodworker for 14 years. I know what silence is for." I set my canvas bag on the chair beside me. I did not pick up the pen, because what Craig didn't know was that I had exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes until a USPTO filing deadline, and I was carrying everything I needed. Have you ever walked into a room where someone had already decided how the meeting would end before you even sat down? Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. 9 months earlier, Eleanor Hargrove was sitting at a workbench on Creston Road, Asheville, North Carolina at 6:15 in the morning, fitting a mortise joint by hand in the gray February light that came through the north-facing window, the way my grandfather had taught me. North light, he used to say, doesn't shift with the hour. You can trust it when you're doing precise work. The workshop smelled like white oak and linseed oil and the particular cold that lives in an unheated building before the space heater has made its case for the morning. The floor was pine board, worn smooth along the paths I walked 100 times every day. The walls held tool hooks my grandfather had bolted to the studs in 1987, and the tools on them were a set of Japanese chisels in a rolled canvas case. 4 bench planes in graduated sizes worn to a shine at the handles. A marking gauge he had made himself from a piece of cherry wood and a machinist's screw he had ordered from a catalog that no longer existed. The workbench cost me nothing. It was the one he built the year I was born. Everything else in that workshop had cost me everything I had. I paid $1,150 a month to rent the building from a Creston Road property management company that raised the rate every January and called it a standard market adjustment. I drove a 2009 pickup truck with 214,000 miles on the odometer and a rear axle I had rebuilt myself the previous April on a Sunday when I couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it. My health insurance premium was $387 a month, the lowest cost plan available in my county. With a $6,500 deductible, that meant I hadn't been to a doctor in 2 years, except once, for a table saw accident that required 4 stitches and a tetanus shot I paid for in cash. I had $4,200 in my checking account. A materials order for $3,600 was due on the 15th. The math was tight. It had always been tight. I had made my peace with that a long time ago. What I had not made my peace with was the waiting, not waiting for money, waiting for the thing that was mine to be recognized as mine. My grandfather, Harold James Hargrove, had filed 3 patents with the United States Patent and Trademark Office between 1979 and 1996. The first was a compound dovetail system that eliminated the traditional gap tolerance problem in solid wood furniture joints. The second was an adjustable mortise alignment jig that reduced setup time by 60% and made the technique accessible to smaller shops without specialized machinery. The third, his most complex and most copied, was a laminated beam bonding process he had developed over 7 years of experimentation. A technique that produced structural furniture components with the strength of engineered lumber and the appearance of solid hardwood without any of the visual compromise. These 3 patents had, in various adapted forms, appeared in the production processes of every major furniture manufacturer in the southeastern United States for the past 20 years. The technique showed up in industry training manuals under renamed variations. They were taught in woodworking workshops by instructors who had learned them secondhand. They had generated by a conservative estimate published in a regional trade journal I had read 3 times and kept in a folder. Somewhere between $4 and $8 million in aggregate cost savings for manufacturers who had never written my grandfather a check. He never sued, he never made a public accusation. He renewed each patent on the required schedule, documented every instance of uncredited use in a log he kept beside the fire safe under his workbench, and said nothing to anyone except, once, to me. "The paper is patient," he said. "Let it wait." I had spent 4 years building a workshop on those techniques. 12 to 15 custom pieces a year, dining tables, commissioned bookshelves, a pair of 4-poster beds for a hotel renovation in Boone that had been featured in a regional architecture magazine. The work was good. I knew it was good. 3 years earlier, a journalist from Southern Crafts Quarterly had requested an interview. I had said I wasn't ready. She asked again the following year. I said the same. In October of this past year, she asked a third time, and I said yes. The interview was scheduled for 6:30 in the evening on the day I am telling you about. She was flying in from Atlanta that afternoon and flying back out the following morning. I had waited 3 years for that conversation to be ready. Then in February, my grandfather called me from the hospital. The voice I heard was not the one I expected, smaller, more careful with the space between words. "I need you to call a man named Gerald Whitfield," he said. "Write down the number." I wrote it down on the back of a lumber receipt from Buncombe County Supply. "I still have it. Don't tell Craig," he said. I didn't ask why. I called Gerald Whitfield the following morning before the workshop opened. He answered on the second ring. He told me my grandfather had established a revocable living trust in February of 2020. He told me what it contained, the 25 acres, the workshop building and all its contents, and the 3 USPTO registered patents, transferred directly into the trust in 2021. He told me I was the sole named beneficiary. He explained the delayed notification provision. I would be formally contacted when I turned 36, or when any third party made an inquiry about the estate assets, whichever came first. I was 35 at the time. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat at the workbench with both hands flat on the surface and felt the grain of the wood under my palms and did not move for a long time. My grandfather died on March 4th, a Tuesday morning. The magnolia tree outside his hospital window had just begun to open. I was the one holding his hand. I was the one who called the family afterward. I was the one who called Craig. He arrived the next day in a rental car, and before he said, "How are you doing?" before he said anything about the man we had both just lost, he asked, "Did he leave a will?" I told him I didn't know. That was technically true. He had left a trust. A will and a trust are 2 different instruments. I let Craig form his own conclusions from the silence. 7 months passed. I worked. The seasons turned, spring orders, summer delivery, fall commissions. The rhythm that has no off switch if you work for yourself and have a materials payment due on the 15th. I thought about my grandfather every day. I used his chisels until one handle split, and I carved a replacement from the same cherry wood he would have used. Then, on a Monday afternoon in November, Craig called Gerald Whitfield's office. He identified himself as the deceased's son and next of kin. He said he was calling to initiate what he described as a straightforward estate transfer. Gerald Whitfield's assistant told him the estate held a trust with a named beneficiary. Craig asked who. He was told the office was not authorized to disclose that. He asked whether the beneficiary could be compelled to authorize a sale. He was told no. He asked whether the 3 patents could be transferred to a corporate holding account during the settlement period, pending the beneficiary's consent. He was told no. He asked whether this could be expedited if the beneficiary were persuaded to cooperate voluntarily. Not asked, not invited, persuaded. Gerald Whitfield called me the following morning. He mailed the full trust documentation that afternoon. It arrived in a yellow envelope with his firm's return address. Inside the envelope, a second envelope, smaller, sealed with clear tape. My name on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. The same hand I had watched fill out lumber invoices since I was 6 years old. I opened his letter with a narrow chisel, clean along the fold, in the direction of the grain. Inside was 1 page written front and back in the careful and unhurried hand of a man who knew exactly what he wanted to say and had chosen a good day to say it. He wrote that he knew Craig would come looking. He had always known. He wrote that the trust was his answer to a question he had spent 30 years watching happen to other craftspeople, the quiet, systematic transfer of a lifetime's work into the hands of people who could see only what it was worth and never what it was for. "This land is yours," he wrote, "not because you earned it, though you did every season, but but because you are the only one who understood what the work is for. The paper is patient, Ellie, now so are you. I sat at the workbench and read it twice. The coffee went cold. The light moved across the floor the way it does in a north-facing window, slowly, honestly, without drama. Then I made 3 calls. The first to Gerald Whitfield to confirm the trust's legal standing and the revocation of Craig's power of attorney, signed by my grandfather on March 14, 2022, 14 months before he died. The second to the USPTO Public Records Office to confirm the current registered status of all 3 patents. The third to my daughter's school to confirm the start time of the winter performance. 7 in the evening, front row. The same seat my grandfather had held for every performance of mine for 18 years. I wrote the 3 deadlines on the back of a piece of scrap paper and tacked it above the workbench. 2:31 in the afternoon. USPTO filing deadline, 2 hours and 29 minutes. 6:30 in the evening. Southern Crafts quarterly interview, 3 hours and 59 minutes. 7 in the evening. My daughter's first winter performance, 4 hours and 29 minutes. My grandfather used to say the most important thing about a deadline isn't the hour. It's knowing, with precision, what happens if you miss it. I packed the canvas bag, trust documentation, USPTO confirmation records, the notarized revocation of Craig's power of attorney, witnessed, dated, filed. I placed everything inside in the order I would need it. I put the bag on the passenger seat of the truck. I drove to Whitfield and Cole. I walked through the door at 2:31 in the afternoon. And Craig Hargrove, who had been in that room for 40 minutes without me, looked up from his color-coded folders and said, "This is a straightforward estate consolidation, Eleanor. Your grandfather would have wanted the family to move forward. He hadn't asked what was in the bag. That was his mistake." I was 9 years old the first time I understood what my grandfather meant when he said, "The paper is patient." It was a Thursday in late September of 1996. I know it was a Thursday because my grandfather had picked me up early from Creston Elementary 3rd grade Mrs. B's, Dunwoody's class, and he only ever did that on Thursdays, when my mother worked a double shift at the county hospital and my father was on the road for the lumberyard. He signed me out at 1:15 in the afternoon in the front office with the same black pen he kept clipped to his shirt pocket every day of his life, and the secretary said, "Have a nice afternoon, Mr. Noon." Hargrove, and he said, "We intend to," and he took my hand and we walked to the truck. I asked him where we were going. He said, "Charlotte." I said, "Why?" He said, "To show some people something they should already know." That was all he said for the first 40 minutes of the drive. I had learned by age 9 not to push my grandfather for information he had decided to deliver in his own time. He drove with both hands on the wheel, the way he did everything, fully committed, no part of him somewhere else. The truck smelled like sawdust and the particular pine resin that lived permanently in the fibers of his work shirts, no matter how many times they were washed. What I knew at 9 was this: that something had been happening in the workshop for the past several months that made my grandfather quiet in a different way than his usual quiet. His usual quiet was the quiet of a man who was thinking about wood, about grain and moisture content and joinery angles. This newer quiet was the quiet of a man who was thinking about people. That was a heavier kind. What I did not know at 9, but learned that afternoon, was the following. In 1989, a furniture manufacturing company called Piedmont Home Collections had begun producing a line of dining tables using a joinery method that bore a precise technical resemblance to the compound dovetail system my grandfather had patented in 1979. Patent number 4,211,487. Filed from a workshop on Creston Road, Asheville, North Carolina, by Harold James Hargrove, sole inventor, on March 3, 1979. Granted 14 months later. The Piedmont tables did not credit the patent. They did not license it. They had altered the dimensions by 3/8 of an inch and changed the name of the joint from compound dovetail to precision interlocking construction and published photographs of their production floor in a trade catalog alongside the phrase proprietary joinery innovation. My grandfather wrote them a letter in 1989. He received no response. He wrote a second letter in 1990, this time to their legal department, including a copy of the original patent documentation. He received a letter from an attorney explaining that Piedmont's technique was independently developed and constitutionally distinct from anything registered under his patent number. The letter used 9 paragraphs to say what amounted to, "We are not going to stop." Most people would have stopped there. My grandfather spent the next 6 years building a case, not with anger. With the same method he used when he was building a difficult piece, slowly, in sequence, making sure each component was perfect before attaching the next one. He kept a log. Every catalog photograph of a Piedmont piece that used his joint geometry, every trade show listing, every published production specification that matched his original filing. He wrote to other craftspeople in the county who had noticed the same pattern. He corresponded with 2 retired USPTO examiners who had reviewed similar disputes. He kept everything in a single archival box under the workbench, organized by date, labeled in his precise handwriting with a black felt tip pen. In September of 1996, he drove to Charlotte to attend a Piedmont Home Collections trade showroom event, open to the public, no appointment required, announced in the regional furniture trade newsletter, and he brought the box. The showroom was on the 14th floor of a building on Tryon Street. I remember the elevator had mirrored walls, and I could see the back of my grandfather's head, his silver hair, his work shirt ironed flat, the archival box under his arm. He was the only person in the building whose shoes had sawdust in the welt seams. The sales representative who met us was 30-something, smooth-handed, apologetic in the particular way of someone who has been told to be apologetic as a professional strategy. He offered coffee. My grandfather declined. He asked how he could help. My grandfather set the box on the showroom table. He opened it. He laid out the documentation in order: the 1979 patent filing, the 1991 attorney letter, the catalog photographs, the trade show, records the correspondence with the USPTO examiners across 3 feet of polished conference table. The same way he laid out lumber before beginning a cut. Organized. Irrefutable. Already decided. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't use a single word of legal terminology that the sales representative could have used as a fulcrum to redirect the conversation. He simply pointed to each document in sequence and said what it was. "This is the original patent. This is your catalog. These are the same joint geometry. This is what the law says about that." The sales representative made 3 phone calls in the next 40 minutes. The third was to Piedmont's legal counsel, who was on speaker and who said, "I remember this because I was sitting in a chair against the wall drawing on the back of a brochure and paying attention the way children pay attention when adults don't think they are. We may need to revisit the licensing question." My grandfather said, "I believe you do." Piedmont Home Collections signed a retroactive licensing agreement in February of 1997. The terms included back payments covering 7 years of production volume. My grandfather used the first check to replace the roof on the workshop. He used the second to start a college fund he never told me about until I was 17. On the drive back to Asheville that Thursday afternoon, I finally asked him the question I had been sitting on for 3 hours. "Why didn't you just sue them?" He was quiet for 1.5 miles. Then he said, "Because the point wasn't to punish them. The point was to make sure the record said what was true. A lawsuit is a fight. What I did today was a correction. I was 9. I didn't fully understand the difference." At 36, sitting in a conference room on the 4th floor of Whitfield & Cole, watching Craig Hargrove straighten a folder that was already straight, I understood it precisely. Today was not a fight. Today was a correction. 3:04 in the afternoon. 96 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. Craig had been talking for 11 minutes about market conditions. He had cited 3 comparable land sales in Henderson County, 2 in Madison County, and 1 in Yancey, all of which he described as indicators of an accelerating rural premium cycle. He had noted that the workshop on Creston Road sat on a corner parcel with dual frontage road access that made it, in his assessment, particularly attractive to mixed-use redevelopment. He had used the phrase "your grandfather's legacy" 4 times in 11 minutes, each time in a sentence that ended with a dollar amount. I had said 6 words in 11 minutes. I had not picked up the pen. Patricia Nolan had shifted position twice. She was now standing slightly closer to the window, which put her slightly farther from the table, which was the direction someone moves when they are trying to reduce their proximity to a thing they do not want to be associated with but have decided not to stop. She had known my grandfather for 12 years. She had watched him sit in this same building, at this firm's conference table, with Gerald Whitfield, her employer, and establish a legal instrument that was, as of this moment, the reason Craig's color-coded folders were worth exactly nothing. She knew this. She had not said it. Is the silence of someone who knows the truth a different kind of silence than the silence of someone who doesn't? I looked at Craig. Walk me through the beneficiary deferral clause, I said. He paused. The pause of a man recalibrating. I'm sorry? The clause you mentioned when I came in. The standard beneficiary deferral under estate consolidation protocol for disputed intellectual property holdings pending co-trustee verification. I said it back to him in the same cadence he had used, the same measured assurance, the same spacing between words. I'd like to see the specific language. Something moved behind his eyes. Not alarm, not yet. Something more like the minor friction of a plan meeting a variable it hadn't fully accounted for. He had expected me to engage with the dollar amounts. Most people do. The number $1.8 million performs a certain function in a room. It draws the eye, focuses the attention, makes everything else feel abstract by comparison. I had not looked at the number. It's standard trust administration language, he said. He opened the second folder. The clause is referenced in the cover documentation. Which document specifically? I said. Tab letter or section number? He turned 2 pages, then a third. The tab he was looking for was not where he thought it was. He moved to the third folder. The room held the particular silence of a space where someone is searching for a thing they were certain they had prepared. 3:09 in the afternoon. 81 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. Patricia Nolan looked at the window. The language appears in the trust summary document, Craig said, recovering. He found a page and turned it to face me. Section 3, Administrative Provisions. I leaned forward and read it. The paragraph used 11 lines to describe what amounted to a temporary transfer authorization pending resolution of co-trustee disputes. It cited a North Carolina Estate Code section number. It used the words standard protocol twice and administrative necessity once. The language was precise and correct in the way that a sentence can be syntactically accurate while describing something that does not actually exist. There was no co-trustee dispute. There was no co-trustee. My grandfather had established a sole beneficiary trust with no co-trustee provision. The administrative language Craig was pointing to had been drafted to describe a situation that the trust's original structure made legally impossible. It was, to use a woodworking term I had always found useful, a joint cut to specifications that didn't match the piece it was meant to hold. I set the page down. Who drafted this summary document? I said. The quarter-inch shift in Craig's posture was nearly imperceptible. The firm's administrative team prepared the summary in coordination with my legal counsel for the purpose of this meeting. Gerald Whitfield's firm? A separate counsel, I see, I said. I did not say, and Gerald Whitfield, who is the actual trustee, was not involved in drafting a document being used to describe his own trust. I did not need to say it yet. I placed my hand on the canvas bag beside my chair, not opening it, just resting my hand on it. The way you rest a hand on a plane before you begin a pass. Not a gesture of threat, a gesture of orientation, knowing where your tools are. Craig watched my hand. Eleanor, he said, and his voice shifted slightly into the register people use when they are about to deploy sincerity as a tactic. I know we haven't always been close. I know the past few months have been difficult. But your grandfather built something remarkable, and the question in front of us is, what protecting that looks like in a practical sense. The Ashwood Group isn't looking to erase his work, they're looking to scale it. To take what he built in a workshop on Creston Road and make sure it reaches. Did you contact the USPTO office before scheduling this meeting? I said. He stopped. 3 seconds of silence. I contacted my legal counsel, who, the USPTO, I said, directly. Did you or your counsel contact the patent office regarding the current registration status of the 3 patents under Harold James Hargrove? Patent numbers 421-148-751-08332 and 5891764? The numbers were precise because I had said them enough times in the past 3 weeks that they lived in my mouth the way mortise dimensions live there. Automatic. Physical. Part of the body's memory. Craig set down his pen. Something had changed in the room, not dramatically. The way a piece of wood changes when you reach the correct thickness. A subtle shift in the sound of the plane, in the resistance against your hands, that tells you the surface is no longer what it was. 3:17 in the afternoon. 73 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. Patricia Nolan had turned from the window. She was looking at me now. Her legal pad was flat against her chest, her pen was not moving. But something in her face had shifted. The specific expression of a person watching a situation resolve itself in a way they had hoped for, but had not had the courage to initiate. In the waiting area beyond the glass partition, I could hear the low voice again. The patient man, still there, still being told in the polished language of administrative process that what he was owed would need to wait for verification that would never arrive on its own. I looked at the glass partition. I looked at Craig. I looked at my watch. 73 minutes. The pen was still on the table. I had not touched it. 3:22 in the afternoon. 68 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. The man in the waiting area was not waiting anymore. He had moved to the reception desk. I could see him through the glass partition. A tall man in his 70s wearing a canvas work jacket the color of pine bark and boots that had the same particular wear pattern as my grandfather's. Heels compressed on the outer edge from decades of standing on concrete shop floors. He was holding a manila folder with both hands, the careful grip of someone who has been told twice already that documents help, so he has made sure to bring them. He was James Earl Mobley. I knew who he was before he said his name. My grandfather had talked about him for 22 years. James knows the wood before he touches it, he used to say. That's not something you can teach. You either have it or you don't, and he has it. James had apprenticed under my grandfather in 1999, the year I turned 12. He had his own shop now, a 2-room building on the east side of Asheville where he made furniture the same way my grandfather had taught him, by hand, in sequence, without shortcuts. He was there to collect what my grandfather had left him, a set of 8 bench chisels, Sheffield steel, hand-forged, irreplaceable, and a bequest of $3,200 in cash, written into the trust document in my grandfather's own handwriting. Section 4, paragraph 2, line 9. The woman at the reception desk was 20-something, neat and professional, with the careful expression of someone following instructions they have been given recently and have not yet had cause to question. I understand, she was saying, her voice low and courteous, but we do need to complete the secondary verification before we can release any items listed under the estate inventory. It's part of our enhanced beneficiary confirmation protocol for third-party disbursements. James shifted the folder in his hands. I've got a copy of the trust document right here, his handwriting, my name. Section 4. I understand. But the protocol requires. I drove 40 minutes, James said, not loudly. The voice of a man who has been patient for a long time and is choosing to remain patient because he was raised to, not because it has been easy. I called ahead. I was told to come in today and bring identification and a copy of the trust page. I brought both. I understand, Mr. Mobley. If you can have a seat, someone will be with you to explain the additional verification steps. You're the third person who said that to me today, James said quietly. I'd like to know what the additional steps are. Same desk, same protocol language, same careful smile, same result. I looked at Craig. He had heard the exchange through the glass. I watched his eyes move to the partition for a half-second, then back to the folders on the table. The practiced redirect of a man who has learned to keep his attention on the transaction in front of him and let the other rooms handle themselves. 3:26 in the afternoon. 64 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. I looked down at the canvas bag beside my chair. I ran the numbers. Not abstractly, concretely, the way my grandfather ran numbers before a difficult cut, not hoping it works out, knowing exactly what happens if it doesn't. If I stood up from this table right now to help James, Craig would use the interruption to call his legal counsel. His counsel would make a second call to the USPTO filing desk and attempt to submit the transfer authorization using the power of attorney document that he believed was still valid. If that submission went through before I could challenge it, the 3 patents would transfer to the Ashwood Furniture Group holding account within 72 hours. Reversing it would take. Gerald Whitfield had been specific about this. a minimum of 18 months of litigation at a cost I could not absorb. During a period when I would not have access to the licensing revenue the patents generated to fund the fight. That was the professional loss. The personal losses were smaller in dollar terms and larger in every other way. The Southern Craps quarterly interview at 6:30 in the evening. The journalist flying in from Atlanta. 3 years of her asking. 3 years of me saying not yet, the moment I had finally said yes to. She would not come back a fourth time. This was not resentment, just reality. Opportunities have a limited number of patience cycles, and I had used 2 of mine already. My daughter's performance at 7 in the evening, front row. The seat my grandfather had held for every recital, every winter concert, every spring show for 18 years without missing one. The seat I had promised to be in. The seat my daughter had looked for in every audience since she was old enough to look. I looked at James through the glass. He was standing with the folder open, now pointing to a specific line on the page, explaining something to the receptionist, in the careful way a person explains something for the 4th time when they have decided that clarity. Not volume is the instrument they will use. He was 71 years old. He had driven 40 minutes. He was holding a document with my grandfather's handwriting on it, a man's final word about what he wanted to happen to things he had spent a lifetime caring about. And someone was telling him the document was not sufficient for reasons that did not exist in any filing system or policy manual in the state of North Carolina. He had known my grandfather for 22 years. My grandfather had known, when he wrote that section, that James would come to collect it. He had known that someone might make it difficult. He had written the language carefully enough to prevent that, but he had also known that careful language and actual outcomes are 2 different things when the person on the wrong side of the desk decides to make them different. You either have it or you don't, my grandfather had said, and he has it. There are moments when the calculation is complete, when you have run every number and weighted every outcome, and you know exactly what you are risking and why. And the only remaining question is whether knowing is enough to make you move. I looked at Craig. I picked up my canvas bag. I stood, not fast, not dramatically. The way you stand when you are certain about what comes next and the certainty does not require announcement. Craig's eyes tracked the movement. Eleanor, give me a moment, I said. I walked through the conference room door. 3:29 in the afternoon. 61 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. Patricia Nolan watched me cross the threshold. She opened her mouth. The small movement of someone at the edge of speech, the intake of breath, the slight parting of lips, the moment just before a word forms that is also the moment before a decision becomes permanent. Then she closed it. She looked at her legal pad. She made a choice. It was a different choice than mine. I did not have time to sit with what that meant. But I noted it the way my grandfather noted everything, without judgment, without drama. For the record, I walked to the reception desk. The receptionist looked up, professionally pleasant. Prepared for a new inquiry. My name is Eleanor Hargrove, I said. I'm the sole named beneficiary of the Harold James Hargrove Revocable Living Trust, case reference number NC 2020 TRF 4471, filed with Gerald Whitfield of Whitfield & Cole Estate Law. Mr. Saft. Mobley's disbursement is listed in Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the trust document he is currently holding. There is no enhanced verification protocol applicable to third-party disbursements under a sole beneficiary trust instrument of this classification under North Carolina estate law. I'd like to know the specific statute or internal policy number you're referencing, please. The receptionist blinked. James Earl Mobley looked at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then something crossed his face. Not relief, not yet. Something older and more careful than relief. Recognition. The particular look of a person who has been alone in a room with a problem and has just realized they are no longer alone. Chapter 36, C, I said to the receptionist, North Carolina Uniform Trust Code. The disbursement instructions in Section 4 are unconditional. There's no verification threshold for cash bequests under $10,000 listed in the trust document or in state statute. I'd like the name of the person who instructed you to apply this protocol. 3:33 in the afternoon. 57 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. Behind me, through the glass, I heard Craig's chair move. Then his voice, lower than his conference room register, directed toward a phone. Yes. I need to speak with Bradley. Tell him it's time sensitive. The receptionist looked toward the conference room, then back at me, then at her computer screen, then at James's folder. Let me get someone from the estate team. That would be helpful, I said. Please ask them to bring the internal policy documentation for the enhanced verification protocol, the written version, with the effective date. She reached for the phone. Craig came through the conference room door. He had the third folder under his arm and his phone in his hand, and the expression of a man who has decided to accelerate a timeline he had previously been comfortable with. His voice was even, controlled. The voice of a man who believes that the introduction of additional authority will reset the balance of a room. Eleanor, this isn't the appropriate venue for Mr. Stramia. Hargrove, I said, and I used the formal address for the first time, which is a small thing that is not a small thing. It establishes, cleanly and without aggression, that the previous register of conversation has concluded, and a different one has begun. I'm asking a procedural question about a policy that's being applied to a trust beneficiary. I'd like the written documentation for that policy. There are proper channels for estate disputes. This isn't an estate dispute, I said. Mr. Mobley has a valid trust document, his name and his identification. He has met every stated requirement for release of his bequest. If there is an additional requirement being applied, I need the written basis for it. Craig looked at James. James looked at Craig. He had the stillness of a man who has been in many rooms where his presence was not welcomed and has learned to take up exactly the space he is entitled to and not 1 inch less. Bradley is going to join us in the conference room, Craig said. If you'd both. My phone vibrated, then twice more in immediate succession. 3 messages arriving within 4 seconds of each other. I looked at the screen. The first was from Gerald Whitfield's office, Ms. Hargrove. USPTO desk has logged an inquiry from a Craig T. Hargrove regarding patent transfer status. Filing window closes at 5 in the afternoon. Advise you contact the office directly if this requires intervention. The second was from the journalist, Ellie. Touching down in Asheville at 5:45. Confirmed for 6:30 at the workshop. This one's going to be good. See you tonight. The third was from my daughter's teacher. Hi. Just reminding families. Doors open at 6:45. Performance starts at 7 sharp. Lily has been so excited. She keeps saving the front left seat for Grandpa's spot. Sweet girl. See you there. I read all 3 messages. I did not respond to any of them. I put the phone in my jacket pocket. 3:38 in the afternoon. 52 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. Craig was watching me. Personal matter? He said. The particular lightness in his voice of a man who believes an interruption has returned leverage to his side of the table. No, I said. I looked at James. Mr. Mobley, I said. Would you come back to the conference room with us? I think this can be resolved quickly. James looked at me for a moment. The assessment of a craftsman. Precise, unhurried, reading grain. All right, he said. We walked back through the glass door together. Craig followed. Patricia Nolan was standing exactly where I had left her, legal pad still against her chest. She looked at James when he walked in. Something moved across her face that I recognized, the specific expression of a person who has just understood that the moment they were waiting for someone else to create has arrived without them. She had been in this firm for 15 years. She had known my grandfather. She had watched James Mobley come through this building twice before for routine trust consultations, always with his folder organized, always prepared, always the person in the room who had done exactly what was asked of him. She looked at her legal pad. She looked at James. She looked at the door. She made another choice, still not the right one, but closer to it than the last. Craig set his phone face down on the conference table. A man named Bradley was joining by phone. I could see the name lit on Craig's screen in the moment before he flipped it over. Legal counsel. Charlotte area code. I sat down. I placed the canvas bag on the table in front of me. I rested both hands flat on it. 3:41 in the afternoon. 49 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. The music had stopped in the lobby speaker. For a moment, the building held a silence that was the accumulation of everything that had been said, and everything that had been avoided, and everything that was about to stop being avoidable. My grandfather's voice came to me the way it always did, not as a memory but as a presence, patient, specific, unhurried. The paper is patient, Ellie. Now so are you. I unzipped the canvas bag. I did not take anything out yet. I looked at Craig Hargrove, a man in a navy suit with color-coded folders and a phone call on the way, who had spent 40 minutes in this room before I arrived preparing for a version of this meeting that had never been possible, because the instrument he was trying to use had been revoked 14 months ago by the hand of a man who knew exactly what his son would do and had prepared accordingly. Craig looked at the bag. His eyes stayed there for 3 seconds. 4. Then he looked up at me. Is there a moment before a correction becomes irrevocable when the person who needs correcting understands what is coming? I believe there is. I believe it lasts exactly as long as it takes for a man to look at a canvas bag and understand that the woman holding it has been ready for this room longer than he has. The phone on the table lit up. "Bradley calling." Craig reached for it. "Don't," I said. He stopped. The room was very quiet. I reached into the bag. I reached into the canvas bag and took out a manila envelope. Not a folder, not a binder, not the kind of organized presentation Craig had laid out across this table 40 minutes ago. A plain manila envelope, 9 by 12 inches, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $2. My grandfather's name was written in the top left corner in Gerald Whitfield's handwriting. My name was written in the center. The return address was the Whitfield & Cole firm. I set it on the table. I did not open it immediately. I looked at Craig, at Patricia Nolan, at James Earl Mobley, who had taken the chair at the far end of the table, his own folder in his hands, watching with the patience of a man who has spent a lifetime doing work that requires you to wait for the right moment and not 1 second before it. Then, I opened the envelope. The first document I placed on the table was the trust instrument itself. 14 pages. Cover page marked with Gerald Whitfield's firm seal, dated February 18, 2020. I turned it to face Craig. I did not slide it toward him. I set it on the table and let him read the cover page from where he sat. Harold James Hargrove, Revocable Living Trust. Established February 18, 2020. Grantor, Harold James Hargrove. Trustee, Gerald Allen Whitfield, Whitfield & Cole Estate Law. Sole beneficiary, Eleanor May Hargrove. You've seen this document, I said. It was not a question. Craig's hands were flat on the table. He did not reach for the document. Gerald Whitfield's office sent you a summary of the trust structure when you called last month, I said. They told you there was a named beneficiary and that the trust was irrevocable following your father's death. That summary referenced this instrument. So you have seen this document, or a description of it precise enough to be functionally equivalent. Craig said nothing. 3:44 in the afternoon. 46 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. I placed the second document beside the first. Notice of Revocation of Durable Power of Attorney. Executed by Harold James Hargrove. Notarized March 14, 2022, Buncombe County, North Carolina. Notary seal, Margaret A. Briggs, Commission Number NC201977741. Revocation applies to all powers of attorney previously granted to Craig Thomas Hargrove, effective immediately upon execution. I let Craig read it. He read it once. Then again, I watched the second reading. The first reading is recognition, the mind finding what it expected or feared. The second reading is the mind going back to check if the first reading was correct, hoping it was not. It was correct. What that means, Craig, I said, and I used his first name because we are family and because the distance I needed was not personal distance but legal distance, and those are different instruments. Is that the power of attorney document your counsel has been referencing, the one you filed with this office? The one on the basis of which you requested a patent transfer inquiry with the USPTO filing desk at some point in the last 30 days was revoked by my grandfather 14 months before he died. The document does not exist as a legal instrument. It has not existed since March 14, 2022. Any action taken under its authority since that date has no legal standing. Patricia Nolan made a sound, not a word. A small sound, the kind a person makes when something they have been waiting to hear finally becomes audible in a room. Craig looked at the revocation notice. There must be an administrative. There's no administrative error, I said. The notarization is valid. The commission number is on file with Buncombe County. The effective date predates every action your counsel has taken on the basis of this power of attorney by 14 months. I placed the third document on the table, United States Patent and Trademark Office. Patent Assignment and Trust Transfer Confirmation. Reference, Trust NC 2020 TR F4471. Patents transferred into trust instrument, February 3, 2021. Patent number 4211487, Compound Dovetail Joint System. Patent number 51083332, Adjustable Mortise Alignment System. Patent number 5891764, Laminated Beam Bonding Process. Current registered holder, Harold James Hargrove, Revocable Living Trust. Sole beneficiary upon grantor's death, Eleanor May Hargrove. Transfer to trust executed, February 3, 2021. USPTO confirmation stamp, February 9, 2021, 10:43 in the morning. The patents transferred into the trust on February 3, 2021, I said. 2 years before my grandfather died, 2 years before this meeting. As of that date, they were no longer part of his personal estate. They were trust assets. They could not be transferred, assigned, or pledged to any party, including Ashwood Furniture Group, without the written authorization of the sole trust beneficiary. I paused. That's me. The room was very quiet. Craig's jaw was set the way a joint sets when the glue has dried and what looked like flexibility has become permanent. He was processing, not the quick processing of a man who has been caught doing something small. The slower processing of a man who understands that the structure he has been building in this room for 6 weeks has just been shown to have been built on a surface that was never there. You set this up, he said. His voice was even. Careful. The voice of a man buying time with words while his mind runs the numbers behind them. You planned this. You knew about the trust for months and you came in here and let me. I came into this office at 2:31 in the afternoon, I said. I requested access to my grandfather's estate documents as the named beneficiary. I asked procedural questions about the policy language in your summary document. I asked for the statutory basis of the verification protocol being applied to Mr. Mobley. Every question I asked was a lawful question about a lawful process. I let that sit for 2 seconds. The rest was your choice. Craig looked at Patricia Nolan. Patricia Nolan looked at the documents on the table. 3:51 in the afternoon, 39 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. I turned to Patricia. I need you to contact the USPTO filing desk, I said. My voice was the same volume it had been for the last 20 minutes, the volume I use when I am explaining the sequence of cuts for a complicated joint. Not loud. Precise. Reference Trust Number NC 2020 TRF 4471. Inform them that the power of attorney submitted by Craig Thomas Hargrove has been revoked since March 14, 2022, and that any transfer inquiry filed under that instrument should be suspended pending review. I'll provide the notarized revocation document by fax within the next 10 minutes. Gerald Whitfield's office will send a concurrent confirmation. I placed Gerald Whitfield's direct fax number on the table, written on a piece of workshop paper in my own handwriting. The fax number is there. Patricia looked at the paper. She looked at Craig. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say in the language of administrative process and procedural necessity and estate consolidation protocol. That language had run out of road. What remained was the actual situation, which was that he had attempted to transfer assets that were not his, using an authority that had not existed for 14 months, in a meeting with a woman he had underestimated precisely because she kept her tools in a canvas bag instead of a color-coded folder. Patricia took the paper. Her hand was not quite steady. She walked to the door. Before she opened it, she stopped. She did not turn around. But she stopped, and the stop itself was something the pause of a person acknowledging without words that the choice they had made 2 hours ago and the choice they were making now were not the same choice, and that the distance between them was not nothing. I'll call the fax through immediately, she said, to the door, not to the room. Then she opened it and walked out. I turned to James. He was watching me with the same expression he had worn since I walked through the conference room door. Not surprise, not gratitude, not the complicated emotion of a person who has been rescued, something cleaner than any of those. The recognition of a craftsman watching another craftsman complete a joint he had been watching form for the past 20 minutes. I opened the trust document to Section 4, Paragraph 2. I turned it to face him. Your bequest is unconditional, I said. No verification requirement, no additional protocol. The chisels are in the estate inventory at the workshop. I'll have them released to you by end of day today. The cash disbursement is processed through the trust account which Gerald Whitfield administers. I'll call his office from the parking lot and have the check cut before 5. I paused. I should have come out to the waiting room sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. James looked at the paragraph. He read it once. He did not need to read it twice. Your grandfather, he said, and then he stopped. Tried again. He always said you were the one who understood what the work was for. He looked at me. He was right about most things. He was right about that. I looked at the document in his hands. My grandfather's handwriting in the margin. James knows the wood. Make sure he gets the chisels. Not typed. Handwritten. Added after the formal language was set. Make sure. 3:58 in the afternoon. 32 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. I looked at Craig. He was standing behind his chair now, one hand on the backrest, the posture of a man who has not decided to leave but whose body has already made the calculation that sitting down would be the wrong signal. His color-coded folders were still on the table. The Ashwood Furniture Group brochure with its silver foil logo and its architectural renderings of luxury structures where my grandfather's workshop currently stood was still on the table. The pen was still on the table. I did not look at the pen. The Ashwood offer is withdrawn, I said, not because I'm angry, because the premise of it was built on an instrument that doesn't exist, and without that instrument, there's no mechanism for the transaction to proceed without my consent, and I'm not giving it. I paused. The patents will be licensed through the trust. Smaller shops, regional craftspeople, educational programs. That was what my grandfather was doing before Piedmont Home Collections decided it was cheaper to copy than to pay. He didn't build that technique for a luxury development company to put its name on. He built it so that the work could be done the right way by people who know what the work is for. Craig's jaw moved. He was going to say something about lawyers, about rights, about the fact that this was not the last conversation on the subject. He was correct that it was not the last conversation. These things rarely are. But he looked at the documents on the table and he understood what my grandfather had understood in a showroom on Tryon Street in Charlotte in September of 1996. The paper was patient. It had been patient for 4 years. It had waited exactly as long as it needed to. Fairness isn't a negotiating position, Craig, I said. It's not something you offer when it's convenient and withhold when it's not. My grandfather built something in a workshop on Creston Road that other people use for 40 years without his name on it. He never stopped documenting it. He never stopped filing. He never stopped keeping the record accurate. Not because he was angry, because accuracy is how the work survives. I looked at the silver pen on the table. I'm not signing anything today. The trust is clear, and I'm the only one who can change that. I don't intend to. I picked up the Ashwood brochure from the table. I set it in front of him. I closed my canvas bag. I looked at my watch. 4:02 in the afternoon. 28 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. Patricia Nolan was already on the phone in the outer office. I could hear her voice through the glass. Precise, clear, professional. Giving the USPTO desk the reference number. Spelling the name on the revocation notice. Doing the job she should have done 2 hours ago with the same competence she was bringing to it now. Some corrections happen before the damage, some happen after. The important thing is that they happen. The lobby of Whitfield & Cole had 6 people in it when I walked through the conference room door at 4:04 in the afternoon. A young couple sitting with a cardboard box of documents between their chairs. An older woman reading a magazine she had not turned a page of since I had last looked. A receptionist who was no longer at her desk. A security guard who had appeared at some point in the last 30 minutes and was standing near the elevator with the particular stillness of someone who had been told to be present without being told exactly why. And a man with his phone out, held low against his knee at an angle that would be invisible to someone who wasn't looking for it. He was 20-something, in a work jacket, had come in behind James sometime after 3:30. He had the patient body language of someone who had decided to stay longer than he planned. The phone was recording. I registered it the way my grandfather registered the Piedmont catalog photographs, without drama. As a data point. For the record. I walked to Patricia Nolan's desk. She was completing the fax confirmation when I reached her. She held up one finger, the professional signal for 30 seconds, and finished reading the reference number into the phone. Then she set the receiver down. She looked at the transcript she had written by hand during the call. Her handwriting was very small and very precise. The handwriting of someone who has spent 15 years taking notes in situations where the details matter. USPTO confirmed receipt, she said. They flagged the inquiry for suspension pending review. Gerald Whitfield's office will receive the concurrent notification within the hour. Thank you, I said. She looked at her desk, at the pen on the transcript, at the fax confirmation code she had written at the bottom of the page. I should have, she started. Gerald Whitfield's direct line, I said. I placed his number on her desk. He'll need to initiate the trust administration process for the remaining estate assets. The sooner that's documented, the cleaner the timeline. It was not forgiveness. It was not the absence of what she had failed to do. It was work. There was work to be done, and she was the person at the desk, and I needed her to do it. She understood the difference. She picked up the phone. In the conference room, I could see Craig through the glass. He was seated now, finally, in the chair where I had been sitting. He was looking at the trust instrument. Not the summary document his counsel had prepared, the original, 14 pages, Gerald Whitfield's firm seal. My grandfather's signature in the bottom right corner of each page, the same signature I had seen on lumber invoices and patent filings, and the birthday cards he left on my workbench every October 3rd, without fail, for 36 years. Craig was reading it the way you read something when the reading is no longer for information. He already knew what it said. He was reading it the way a man reads the record of a decision he had no part in making that was made about him deliberately, by someone who knew him precisely well enough to know exactly what needed to be decided. He did not look up when I walked past the glass, 4:11 in the afternoon. James Earl Mobley was standing near the elevator. He had his folder under his arm, the way he had when I first saw him. Secure, organized, the documentation of a man who prepares because he has learned that preparation is what you are left with when the room is not on your side. The difference was that the folder now contained one additional page, a copy of Section 4, Paragraph 2, with my signature in the margin confirming the unconditional release of his bequest. He looked at me when I walked toward him. Chisels by end of day, I said. Check from Whitfield's office by tomorrow morning. He nodded once. A craftsman's nod. Complete, unhurried, the gesture of a person who does not need to say more than the work requires. Then he said, "You look like him, you know, when you're working. Same thing in the eyes." I did not have an answer for that. I did not need one. The elevator opened. He stepped in. The doors closed. I stood in the lobby for a moment. The young man with the phone was still there. He had shifted position, closer to the reception area now, the phone still low, still at the careful angle. He was looking at me, not with the studied casualness of someone trying not to be noticed, with the direct attention of someone who has decided that what he has recorded matters and is waiting to see how the last frame resolves. I looked at him. He looked at me. I did not ask him to stop. I did not ask what he intended to do with what he had. I thought about my grandfather's log, kept under the workbench for 7 years. Every photograph, every catalog, every production specification. The record matters, he had said. Make sure it says what's true. The young man nodded, once. The small nod of someone who has made a decision. I picked up my bag. I walked to the elevator. 4:14 in the afternoon. 16 minutes until the USPTO filing deadline. The lobby was already different from when I had walked into it at 2:31, not loudly different. The way a piece of wood is different after the final pass of the plane. The same grain, the same structure, the same fundamental material, but the surface has changed. What was rough is now true. What was approximate is now accurate. I pressed the elevator button. I did not look back at the conference room. In the elevator, I took out my phone. I opened my contacts, scrolled to the name I had been carrying in my chest for the past hour and 43 minutes, like a tool I had not yet had reason to use. Lily. She answered on the second ring. Mom? I'm on my way, I said. A pause. Then, did it go okay? I thought about Craig reading the trust document, about Patricia Nolan on the phone with the USPTO desk, her handwriting small and precise on the transcript, about James Earl Mobley stepping into an elevator with a folder under his arm, and 47 years of my grandfather's teaching in his hands. About a young man with a phone held low against his knee, deciding what the record should contain. Yeah, I said. It went okay. Front row, she said. Front row, I said. Grandpa's seat. She made the sound she makes when something is settled. A small exhale, not quite a word, the sound of a person setting down a weight they had been carrying so quietly they had not realized they were carrying it. I saved it, she said. I put my backpack on it. I know, I said. I'm coming. I stepped out of the elevator into the parking structure on the 4th level of the Whitfield and Cole building. The November air was cold and particular, the cold of a Blue Ridge afternoon in the last weeks of fall, the air that smells like wood smoke and leaf decay and something older than either, the specific temperature of elevation. I walked to the truck. I set the canvas bag on the passenger seat, the same seat where it had ridden down from Creston Road 3 hours ago, heavier then with what had not yet been said, lighter now with what had been. I started the engine. I pulled out of the parking structure into the late afternoon light. The clock on the dashboard read 4:17 in the afternoon, 13 minutes until the filing deadline. Somewhere in the Whitfield and Cole building, Patricia Nolan was completing a fax. The USPTO desk had the revocation notice. Gerald Whitfield's office had the concurrent confirmation. The 3 patents, 42114875, 108332, and 5891764, were exactly where my grandfather had put them in February of 2021, in a trust built for the purpose of making sure that what he built would go where he intended it to go. The paper was patient. It had waited. The work was not finished. It would not be finished today. Craig had lawyers. Lawyers had time. There would be more rooms, more documents, more conversations in the language of administrative process and procedural necessity. My grandfather had known this. He had spent 7 years building a case against Piedmont Home Collections, not because 7 years was the minimum necessary time, but because 7 years was how long it took to do it without error. The point wasn't to punish them, he had said. The point was to make sure the record said what was true. I drove west on Merriman Avenue toward Creston Road. The mountains were in the windshield. The same mountains they had been that morning. The same mountains they would be at 7 in the evening when I sat in the front left seat of a school auditorium in the chair that used to be my grandfather's chair, watching my daughter perform for the first time in a program he had been looking forward to long enough that he had mentioned it to me in the hospital room in the same conversation where he told me to call Gerald Whitfield. Go see Lily perform, he had said. Don't let anything make you miss it. I had not let anything make me miss it. I drove home. 3 months later, the workshop on Creston Road smelled the same as it always had. White oak, linseed oil. The particular cold of a February morning before the space heater has made its case. The same north-facing window. The same pine board floor, worn smooth along the paths I walk 100 times every day. The same tool hooks my grandfather bolted to the studs in 1987. Some things change slowly. Some things don't change at all. The work of knowing which is the work of a lifetime. Here is what changed. Patricia Nolan resigned from Whitfield and Cole Estate Law on December 3, 11 days after the meeting in the 4th floor conference room. She did not resign loudly. She submitted a letter, 2 paragraphs, professional in tone, specific in intent. She cited a conflict between the firm's representation practices and her own professional obligations. She cited no names. She did not need to. Gerald Whitfield told me about it when he called to confirm the trust administration timeline. He said Patricia had also filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina State Bar Association regarding the preparation and use of the summary document Craig's outside counsel had drafted for the November meeting. The document that had cited a non-existent estate code provision, that had described a verification protocol that did not exist, that had been placed in front of a beneficiary as if it were a legitimate legal instrument. The complaint was under review. It would take time. These things always take time. The Bar Association has a process, and the process has a timeline, and the timeline is not designed for speed. But it had been filed. It was on record. The paper was patient. Patricia was currently working as an independent paralegal, taking on estate and trust cases for small firms in the Asheville area. She had called me once, in January, to ask a procedural question about the trust document. She had not apologized. I had not asked her to. But at the end of the call, before she hung up, she said, "Your grandfather was a good man. I should have remembered that sooner." I said, "You remembered it when it mattered." That was not entirely true, but it was the truest thing I could offer. She was still carrying what she had not done. I could hear it in the careful precision of her professional voice, the specific quality of a person who has added a new standard to their own internal accounting and is making sure, going forward, that every column is correct. Some debts you pay in full. Some you pay in behavior, one decision at a time for as long as it takes. Craig Hargrove did not lose his real estate license. Not immediately, not automatically, not the way a story like this sometimes promises things will resolve. The world is not built for clean endings. What happened was this: Gerald Whitfield filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission in December, citing the preparation and submission of documents under a revoked power of attorney. The commission opened a review in January. The review was ongoing as of the date I am telling you this. These investigations take between 6 and 18 months. Craig had legal counsel. The counsel had objections. Due process exists because it must, not only when we find it convenient. What I can tell you is that Craig's outside legal counsel, the firm in Charlotte that had drafted the summary document, withdrew from representation in mid-January, citing irreconcilable differences in strategic approach. That is a polite way of saying that when the revocation notice and the USPTO confirmation landed in their records, someone in their offices ran the numbers and decided that the distance between what they had been told and what the document said was a distance they did not wish to stand in. Craig and I have not spoken since the 4th floor of Whitfield and Coley. He sold his Charlotte condo in January. He is renting now, I am told, in a building on the south side of the city. I did not go looking for this information. It came to me the way information comes in small towns and in families, through the particular network of people who know things, and who mention them to you because they believe you should know. I did not respond to it the way a story like this sometimes promises you will respond, with satisfaction, with vindication, with the clean emotion of a wrong corrected and a person appropriately diminished. I responded to it the way my grandfather responded to the Piedmont licensing agreement in 1997. He deposited the check, he replaced the roof, he went back to work. The point was never Craig. The point was the record. James Earl Mobley received his chisels on the evening of November 19th. I drove them to his shop on the east side of Asheville myself, wrapped in the original canvas roll my grandfather had kept them in since 1983. The check from Gerald Whitfield's office had arrived that morning. James was in the middle of a chair commission when I pulled up, a ladder-back dining chair in white ash, the rungs turned by hand on a lathe that was older than both of us. He set down his tools. He unwrapped the chisels one at a time, the way you unwrap something you know the weight of before you touch it. He didn't say much. He held the largest chisel, a 1-inch pig sticker, Sheffield steel, the handle worn to a perfect oval by 40 years of my grandfather's grip, and he looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it carefully on his workbench, in the same position, I noticed, that my grandfather kept it. Bevel up, handle to the right. He had been teaching a woodworking class at the Asheville Community Center on Tuesday evening since October, 12 students. 8 of them had never held a hand tool before they walked through that door. 3 of them were now working on their first commissioned pieces. My grandfather had taught James. James was teaching 12 more. The techniques in those 3 patents, 4211, 4875, 108, 332, and 5891764, were licensed through the trust to 6 small workshops in the first quarter of the year, 2 in North Carolina, 1 in Virginia, 1 in Tennessee, 2 educational programs, one of which was the Asheville Community Center Tuesday class. The licensing fee for educational use was $1 per year. That was what my grandfather had written into the trust guidelines: educational licensing, $1 annually. No exceptions for commercial applicants, no discounts for commercial applicants. He had been specific about that. Total licensing revenue in the first quarter, $34,400 from 4 commercial workshops, deposited into the trust. Allocated per the trust's distribution schedule, 40% to ongoing patent maintenance and legal defense, 30% to reinvestment in the Creston Road workshop infrastructure, 30% to a fund my grandfather had designated in his handwriting as future craftspeople who don't yet know they're craftspeople. I had not changed a word of it. The video was posted on November 21st, 2 days after the meeting. I did not know the young man's name. I still don't. He posted it from an account with 11 followers. By the end of the first day, it had 14,000 views. By the end of the week, it had over 1.2 million. By the time I am telling you this, it has been viewed 4,300,000 times on 4 platforms in 22 countries. It was 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. It began with James Earl Mobley at the reception desk, folder in hand, explaining Section 4 to a receptionist who was explaining a protocol that did not exist. It showed Craig walking through the conference room door. It showed me asking for the specific statute number. It showed the moment I said don't and Craig's hand stopping above his phone. It did not show the documents. The young man had been careful about that. Careful in the way of someone who understood the difference between a record and an exposure, between making something visible and making something legible. The caption read, "She came prepared." That's all. She just came prepared. 3 state legislators cited the video in January when introducing a bill requiring estate law firms to provide beneficiaries with independent verification resources before any consolidation meeting. The bill was in committee. These things take time. One furniture manufacturing association in the southeastern United States issued a statement in December regarding voluntary licensing transparency practices. The statement cited no specific case. It did not need to. The record said what was true. The paper did what it had always done. It waited, and then it was read, and then it was impossible to unread. The workshop on Creston Road is still on Creston Road. The space heater still takes 20 minutes to make its case in the morning. The north window still holds the same honest light. My grandfather's tool hooks are still in the studs where he put them. The workbench he built the year I was born is still where he put it, against the east wall, under the window, where the light is good for precise work. I hung a photograph above the bench in December. My grandfather, standing in the workshop doorway, approximately 1994, based on the tools visible behind him, he is wearing his work shirt. There is sawdust in the crease of his collar. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at something in his hands that is not visible in the frame. He looks like a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be. I look at it every morning before I begin the day. The Southern Crafts quarterly piece ran in February. 6 pages, photographs, a full account of the trust, the patents, the Tuesday evening classes at the community center. The journalist had, as she promised, been thorough. She had spent 4 hours at the workshop. She had photographed the tools. She had photographed the north window. She had photographed the photograph of my grandfather. The issue sold out its print run. I received 43 emails from craftspeople in 11 states in the 2 weeks after publication. 12 of them were asking about the Tuesday evening class model. 4 of them were asking about the licensing structure. One of them was from a woman in Knoxville, Tennessee, who said she had been trying to protect a pattern her mother had developed for 30 years, and didn't know until she read the article that a trust instrument was something she could use to do it. I forwarded her Gerald Whitfield's contact information. That was all I could do. It was not nothing. At 7 in the evening on November 19th, I sat in the front left seat of the Crestwood Elementary School auditorium. The seat beside me was empty, the way a seat is empty when the person who belonged in it is no longer there to sit in it. The seat on my other side held my canvas bag, which held nothing now except my wallet and my keys, and a workshop receipt for 12 board feet of white ash I had ordered that morning. The lights went down. My daughter walked onto the stage. She found me in the 3rd second of looking. The specific search of a child who knows where the person they are looking for should be and is checking to confirm it. Her face when she found me was not a performance. It was the private face of a person who had been carrying something small and significant all day and has just been allowed to set it down. She was 8 years old. She was wearing a blue dress and shoes that were slightly too big because she had chosen them herself at the store in October and had been growing toward them ever since. She was, in that moment, the most precise thing I had ever seen. I put my hand up. Small wave. The wave of a person who is exactly where they said they would be. She smiled. The music started. My grandfather's seat was not empty. I was sitting in it. Something real happened in that 4th floor conference room on a Tuesday in November. A trust instrument built by a man who understood that preparation is its own form of protection held its shape against the pressure of someone who had counted on it not existing. A craftsman received what he was owed on the day he was owed it, with no additional verification required. A young man with a phone made a decision about what the record should contain. A woman who had been silent for 2 hours longer than she should have been picked up a phone and made a call. These things happened. They are measurable. They are in the record. The patents are in the trust. The licensing structure is operational. The Tuesday evening class has 12 students who are learning to do the work the way the work is meant to be done. A bill is in committee. A complaint is under review. A woman in Knoxville, Tennessee, has Gerald Whitfield's phone number. None of this is nothing. But Eleanor Hargrove walked into that room with something most people who walk into those rooms do not have. She had a canvas bag with a notarized trust instrument, a revocation notice confirmed by Buncombe County, and a USPTO transfer confirmation stamped 10:43 in the morning on February 9, 2021. She had a grandfather who had spent 40 years building the kind of paper record that makes those documents possible. She had a patent attorney who had been preparing for that specific meeting since 2020. She had a fax number written on workshop paper in her own handwriting. She came prepared because she had been given, by a man who loved her, the decades-long gift of someone preparing on her behalf. What about everyone who walks into the same room without the canvas bag? What about the craftsperson whose work was copied and who did not have a grandfather who could explain USPTO filing procedures? What about the estate beneficiary who receives a summary document describing a non-existent protocol and does not know to ask for the statute number? What about the man who drives 40 minutes with the right documentation and the right name and the right identification, and there is no one in that building who will walk through the conference room door? How many systems change only when someone who has the documentation, the legal instrument, the decades of preparation, the grandfather with the archival box, sits down across the table from the person applying a protocol that was never written down? How many people walk through that same door every single day without a canvas bag, without a trust number, without a notarized revocation, without the specific and particular gift of someone who spent 4 years making sure the record said what was true? And what does it tell us, all of us, that the story we tell most often, the story that reaches 4 million views in 3 weeks, is the one that ends with a woman setting 3 documents on a polished conference table? Not the 10,000 stories that end in the parking lot with a folder under one arm, driving 40 minutes home to a shop where the tools are still waiting, still good, still ready to be used, in a room where no one came through the door? Eleanor Hargrove won because her grandfather was precise, because he was patient, because he had spent a lifetime in rooms where the paper was the only thing that held. Not everyone has a grandfather like that. Not everyone has 40 years of documentation and a law firm that picks up on the second ring. Not everyone has a canvas bag with the right contents. The work of making sure more people do. That work is not in any trust instrument. It is not in any patent filing. It is not settled by any meeting in any fourth-floor conference room in any city in any state. It is the work that doesn't have a deadline. It is the work that does not end when the elevator doors close and someone drives west on Merriman Avenue toward the mountains. It is patient work, the kind that takes a long time to do without error. My grandfather knew that. Now, so do we. At Revenge Dimension, we don't soften the emotion or dilute the message. We tell powerful fictional stories inspired by real-world issues that too many people face in silence in estate offices and hospital waiting rooms. In the small bureaucratic spaces where systems are applied by people who believe in procedure more than they believe in people. If today's story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, or made you see something you couldn't unsee, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because the conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning.